and turn it over to Megan. Go ahead, Megan.
Hi, everyone. Happy to have you. I'm really excited, and I'm just going to jump right in. We have a lot of content to get through. I do have a series of videos that are going to show you different ways to program the iPad and listed directions after. I am currently in a full-time assistive technology coordinator for a K-12 school district, and I teach assistive technology courses for the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and Aurora University. As you go, certainly as you were directed, please feel free to put any questions into the question and answer box. I do have that open. I might not be able to answer it as right away, but I will definitely get to them, and I'm happy to stay extra time to answer any questions you have. Okay, here's my little disclaimer. Not that I'm not making money for this or anything, but what I'm going to show you today are just some options I've tried. These are kind of things that I've put together to make iPads work. There are definitely other hardware options out there. This is not a full list. I just haven't tried everything. I'm going to show you 4 or 5 different ways we can hook up switches to iPads. I also don't know if all of these will always work. Many of these are using adapters I purchased off the internet. So as iOS updates, some things may change. And in addition, I haven't experimented with every switch accessible communication app. So this presentation is focusing on some of the more inaccessible apps. So hardware options, this is what we're starting with. The first half of the presentation is how do we hook up switches to the iPad? The second half will be now that we have switches hooked up, what do we do with it? So right now I'm going to talk through a few different things. The Hook Plus and the Bluetooth switch are both switches you can purchase through Ablenet that hook up to the iPad. I'm also going to discuss a Don Johnson Switch Interface Pro with an adapter, and then the Hitch 2 Switch Interface Pro with a Lightning multi-port adapter. I have all those here, so I will have pictures for you. The fifth one I wanted to mention was the Tapio. It is a viable option. I just don't personally own it, so I'm not talking about it in depth. But if you're interested in it, here's their website, and you can access it. It allows you to hook up 2 switches. There's 2 ports, and they just also happen to have a really nice video on switch control options. So explore that if you'd like. So getting into the meat of the presentation. Ablenet Hook Plus is one of the possibilities to hook up switches to an iPad. Some of the positives are it's a quick plug in and go. It will automatically set up 2 switch scanning or 1 switch scanning. You can plug in up to 4 switches for multiple use and multiple functions. You don't have to charge a battery, which is nice. The new version can wake up a sleeping iPad, which is very nice if you have someone who is fully accessing their iPad through switches. If the iPad is falling asleep, the switch will be able to wake it up. And you can also use a keyboard, like a Bluetooth or another keyboard, without having any conflict, which is nice. Sometimes some of the other switches use keyboard commands to make things work, so there is some conflict. And it is Apple approved, which is very nice. Some of the limitations on this is there's only 4 programmable switches, and 2 of them are automatically programmed. It is about $220, and the current version of the Hook Plus available on Ablenet doesn't work with the USB-C, which is the new charger that can be found on the iPad Pros. To learn more about the Hook Plus, you can watch the official Ablenet video. I'm not going to show that right now, just because we're going to kind of try to go through this quickly, but you have access to it in your slides. I will show you some options in the future of others that do work with the USB-C adapter. I saw that question come in. Okay, so this is what the Hook Plus looks like. Currently I have it connected just to 2 switches. If you put in the 2 switches into port 1 and 2 and then plug it into the iPad, it will automatically configure to 2 switch scanning. If you just put 1 switch in to the Hook Plus and then plug it in the iPad, it will automatically configure to one switch scanning. So if you have a student, client, or child using that type of scanning, this is a really, really easy way to get started. It will auto configure, which is nice. This link here on YouTube is from Ablenet, and it can give you more directions. It's a video of how to with the connections. It is nice. It uses Apple's built-in scanning, and as I said before, it's not the keystrokes. This will make a little more sense when I show you some of the other options. But you do need to be aware that because it doesn't use keystrokes, it integrates really well with opening up various apps, but some of the apps, like some of the communication apps, depending which communication apps you use, do require the keystrokes, which can be programmed into switch number 3 and 4. It's just something to be aware of. I know it seems like I'm going fast, but I promise once I show you all the options, it'll make a little more sense. So that was the Hook Plus. That is one way to get switches into an iPad. Another option is the Bluetooth switch. This is also available through Ablenet. If you want to talk about some positives and limitations, one of the positives, it's wireless. So you don't necessarily have to be, the Bluetooth doesn't have to be right connected to the iPad. You can plug in 2 switches to the side, the back side behind the yellow and or orange and white. There's a plug so you can have switches if you want alternate positioning, maybe head positioning. There are modes on here which allow you to have 6 different programmable switches or 6 different functions. And if you plug in a keyboard, you can actually program this to have up to 10 different possibilities. And it will work with all iPads. So this will work with the iPads that have the Lightning connection, but also work with the USB-C connection. Limitations are you do have to have the battery charged. I'm going to be honest, sometimes that's a downfall because people often forget to charge the iPad, let alone charging the switch, the Bluetooth switch. It is an extra step to make sure that the device is connected to the iPad. And another limitation is that there's only 2 switch ports, so you wouldn't be able to say have 3 switches at a time if that's something you're working on. And it is a unitasker. It's just used for switch access for about $220. And again, if you want to learn more about this switch, the official Ablenet video on the Bluetooth is available there. Okay, so this is where we get into some of the more interesting connections. And this is what I wanted to spend a little more time on, because there's no manual that will help you with this. There are manuals that help you with the first 2. So this is something I wanted to discuss a little more. So this is the Don Johnston Switch Interface Pro with a Lightning to USB adapter. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. You cannot purchase these anymore. I've called Don Johnston and I've begged. Unfortunately, they're no longer available for purchase. So this is an adapter that you're going to have to look around your school and see if you have any of these. Hopefully there's still a few lying around because it is a great product. But don't worry, I have another option after this, so don't be nervous. But if you are able to find one of these, this is a great way to hook switches up to your iPad. So you take the interface and all you need to purchase to make it work is actually the $29 Apple camera adapter. That's that little white adapter you can see plugged into the iPad. It just takes that Lightning and turns it into the USB adapter. Here's the link that I use to purchase mine that works. You can try an off-brand, it may work. I just didn't, just because that's how my school district works. They wanted to try the real Apple one and it worked. So right now I can only vouch for the actual Apple brand, but it is free to you to try something else. So let's talk about some of the positives and limitations for this. It is the most cost-effective option that I'm sharing with you, because if you already have the switch interface, it's only an extra $29 to make that interface work for the iPad. And you may already have it, which is great. It does allow you to plug in multiple switches and program many functions for each switch. And that's, again, what the second half of this presentation is going to talk about, is programming the functions of those switches. One of the things I like the best too is the flexibility for the student, the parent, the client. Since the interface can be used with the iPad, you can also unplug it and use it with a computer. which is nice. So this is one of my favorite multitaskers. You get access to the iPad and access to a computer using that same equipment. The neatest thing about this too is there are 18 programmable switches or 18 different keyboard functions on that interface that we can then program the iPad to do 18 different things based upon which switch you're hitting. And it will work with the USB-C. The picture I showed you was a Lightning to USB adapter. I also purchased that USB-C to USB adapter. Let me grab that real quick just to show you guys. I don't know if all of you are aware. We all know that the iPad has the Lightning adapter, but the new iPad Pros, I'm getting real close to the camera, the new iPad Pros, and probably in a couple years, new iPads that are being purchased are going to have a new charging port. It's not the usual thin Lightning adapter. It's called a USB-C. So it's smaller than a regular USB. And this is what many Android phones are working on right now, if you've seen this before. So iPad Pros right now, and probably in a couple of years, regular iPads will probably work with this USB-C. So that's why I'm addressing it right now. You might not have run into it, but you probably will in the future. So again, I did purchase this, the camera, the USB to the USB-C adapter, and it did work with the Don Johnson switch. Some limitations are you can't charge the iPad at the same time if you're using this single adapter. And it does take some organization and programming to make this switch work. It's not as easy as the plug-in as like the Hook Plus was. But again, the second half of this presentation, we'll talk all about that, so don't worry. It is not technically Apple approved. So I'm not, it works right now and it's worked for many years and I'm assuming it will continue to, but it's just kind of that disclaimer again. And then, to be honest, it's only an option if you already own the switch interface, because if you don't have the Don Johnson, there's not many places to get it. All right, let me show you one more option, and then I will take a look at the questions and answers and see if there's anything I can do to help you guys. So here is another option. Again, it looks like it's a little finagled, but this is wonderful. This is a great one. This is actually the Hitch 2 switch interface with a Lightning multi-port adapter. It just so happens when I took that Hitch 2 and tried to plug it into this regular USB to Lightning adapter, it said that there wasn't enough power. It wasn't working correctly. And it just so happened when I took this multi-port three-prong adapter and plugged it in, it did work. So I know it's funny, the Don Johnson works with the single, but for some reason, the Hitch 2 needs the triple. Don't know why it works that way. That's just the way it works. Again, I'm going back to my disclaimer. This is what I found to work. So please just take all my experiments and hopefully it works for you too. Here is a link to the one I purchased from Amazon. The off-brand did work well for me. You could certainly try the Apple brand if you'd like. So the Ablenet Hitch 2 on its own is $99 and then the adapter was $20. So it's a decent price for having that, again, that multitasker. You can have access to your iPad using a $20 adapter, and then you can have access to a computer using the Hitch 2. So here is the list of positives and the limitations. So it's cost effective for about $120. You can make iPad switch accessible. It does allow you to plug in multiple switches and multiple functionality. We don't have quite as many options as we did with the Don Johnson Switch Interface Pro, but at least you can actually purchase this one, which again is a positive. I do, again, as I mentioned, like the flexibility for the students and the parents or anybody working, because you can use this in the iPad, but you can also use it as a computer. And like I said, you can actually obtain all these tools right now. You could purchase them today and be able to use iPads as soon as they come in. Another positive is you can charge the iPad at the same time. One of the 3 ports is actually a charging port, so that's nice. And again, I did purchase an adapter with the USB-C, so the Hitch 2 does work on the iPad Pro with that USB-C adapter. Some limitations, just like with the Don Johnson, it does take some programming and organization to get these switches working, which again, we'll talk about in the second half of this presentation. It is not technically Apple approved, so there's no guarantee it'll work forever. Again, maybe in iOS 20 update, they do something that makes this work funny. So I don't know. I'm just telling you it's worked now, and it's worked for quite a few years for me. At the moment, the Hitch 2 comes available with 6 programmable switches. And then kind of like in that Bluetooth, if you plug in a keyboard, you can program the bottom row. There's 5 blue ones. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the bottom that you can program so that they can become 5 additional ports. Okay. So as I was experimenting, there were a few things that didn't work for me. I tried a few different adapters. I couldn't get this ATEC switch interface to work with the iPad. Maybe you can, I just haven't been able to. And for some reason I tried, and the 2-prong adapter did not work with the Hitch 2. For some reason it needed a 3-prong adapter. There's like no rhyme or reason for me. I'm just telling you what worked and how it worked for me. Okay, I'm going to take a quick second and look at any questions that we have about hardware. So what I just showed you were 3 or 5, technically, different ways to hook up the iPad. I showed you pictures of 4 different options: the Hook Plus, the Plu 2, and then the 2 options with the Don Johnston switch interface and the Hitch 2 switch interface. And then way back in the beginning, I mentioned that 5th one that I just personally didn't have, but is a viable option. So like I said, let me look really quickly to see if there's any questions, and then we can move on to the meat and potatoes of the presentation. I have not used, there was a question about the ASL head array power wheelchair control. I have not used that to interface with an iPad. Right now, I'm just using our standard Jelly Bean switches with the 4 options I've showed you. And I have tried all those 4 options and have gotten them all to work. However, as you can see, you might just have to play around with the connections. Now you know that maybe you could take one of your switch interfaces and try different adapters, maybe order a couple different adapters offline and see if it works with the iPad. I did this through some trial and error myself. I believe some of the other questions were answered. When I say plug in and go, like for the Hook Plus, the Hook Plus is actually designed to just plug in and go. If you put 2 switches into the Hook Plus and then literally plug the Hook Plus right into the iPad, it auto configures. It will set up the first switch to be the selector, and it will set up the second switch to be the mover. Those 2 videos that are there will explain that a whole bunch more. So if that's something that you're interested in, if you have a student, a client using like 2 switch step scanning, that Hook Plus is a really nice option because it is really easy to use. All the iPads that I'm using right now are on some version of iOS 14. It does work with ones that are still on 13. I have not tried it on any older ones at 10, but all this switch accessibility started in iOS 7, I believe. So all of these should work with just about any iPad. When I was talking about Apple approved, and if a product is Apple approved, I believe Ablenet actually worked with Apple when they were creating the Hook Plus. So it's designed to integrate really well, hence the automatic setup for the Hook Plus, the auto configuration, where all of our other products just don't have the auto configuration. They still work just fine. They've always worked. I personally, when we went into remote learning, ended up purchasing about 30 sets of this switch interface. I purchased 30 Hitch 2s and 30 of this multi-port adapter so that I could send it home with all my students who required switches to access their materials. The Hook Plus does not work with a computer. The end of the Hook Plus is just that lightning adapter. So it is designed just to go into the iPad. All of the options I'm giving maintain connections with the iPad equally. All 4 of these options I've tried are great, they're viable. I haven't had any issues with them. I have not tried the applicator Praetorian, unfortunately. If you want to email me afterwards, we can talk about it more. And I don't know Tekla. Sorry, that's not one of the options I've tried. Right now, the Hitch 2 from Ablenet, what you can purchase offline is just the regular Lightning adapter. I don't believe they have a USB-C adapter yet for the Hook Plus, but I bet Ablenet is on it. So if you want more information, there were questions about the Bluetooth and how to connect that to the Bluetooth interface. I'm going to kind of refer you back to their manual. You can download that offline. And if you watch the official Bluetooth video that I had a link to, you'll get more information. I didn't want to go too in depth with some of these options because I know one, there isn't a ton of time for it, but I also know you're going to kind of want to dive into deeper to whatever equipment you have. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on something that everybody else doesn't have. There may be other wireless options out there. The Bluetooth was just the best one that I knew of and the one that I own already. So again, I know there's a lot of options out there in the world. These are just the 4 or /5 I'm most familiar with. That kind of goes back to my disclaimer where this is not an end all be all presentation. I'm just letting you know what I've tried, what's worked for me, and how we make it work. Emma had a very good question. Did I try the Don Johnson with the multi-port so you could charge? I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I have tried it, but I'm pretty sure it would actually work. The Don Johnston was very flexible where it could work with just about anything. You guys have a lot of great questions. Okay, I am going to move on to part of the presentation now. But like I said, at the very end, I am happy to stick around and answer more questions because I'm sure there are some I didn't get to just because there's so many. But I also want to save enough time for me to actually explain like how we program the switches and make them do what we want to do. So keep writing questions if you want. Again, at the end of the presentation, I will go through plenty. Okay, so now onto the programming. Okay. As we discussed before, like the Hook Plus, for example, has that 1 switch automatic scanning and 2 switch step scanning. Just so you know, all of the adapters can be programmed. All 4 options I showed you, actually all 5 options I showed you can be programmed to do that 1 switch automatic scanning and the 2-step switch step scanning. That's an option for everything. It just so happens that the Hook Plus does that automatic configuration where all the other options I showed you, you just have to manually configure it. I'll give you some directions of that coming up. So here's our directions. The standard programming. And when I say standard programming, I'm talking about the standard programming, the configurations that are built into Apple. Again, since iOS 7, I believe it was when scanning started, Apple had the built-in 1 and 2 switch scanning. The best way to do this is actually just to use the Ablenet accessibility guide. I have used this for years, and I've used this information for some of my other switch accessible configurations too. So if you have the Bluetooth or if you have the Hook Plus, I strongly, strongly recommend just clicking on this link and using their manual. Things that they talk about in this manual, just to let you know, is it talks about the auto configuration. It talks how to do a single switch auto scan and a single switch step scan, and how to do a dual switch step scanning. Again, I know that this is specifically speaking to the Hook Plus and the Bluetooth, but if you read these directions, it will also help you set it up if you're using the Don Johnson or the Hitch 2. These same directions will work to set up that auto scan and 2-switch step scanning, no matter what interface you're using. So other topics covered in the manual, if you want to, again, I strongly recommend looking at it kind of almost no matter what. It talks about auto scanning, and it will go through, these are some of the settings that are built into the iPad accessibility. So I know it seems like I'm kind of glossing over the standard iOS accessibility features, but like I said, there's manuals here and there's trainings, YouTube videos everywhere on the web to use the standard iOS scanning. So things that this manual, the Ablenet manual, will talk about is, you know, how to pause on the first item, how to loop if it's going through an auto scan, how many loops do you want to go through before it stops. There is something called a long press. So Apple now has something called a long press, where if you have a switch and just do a single tap, it'll do one function. But if you do a long press, so like a tap and hold, you can program it to do a separate function. This long press is a setting that's part of scanning, and it's part of all the accessibility features. You can determine how long you want the long press to be, whether it be 1 second, 2 seconds, a fraction of a second, and you can assign a second function to that long press. So the manual will talk about that. It also tells you how you can change cursor color, the shape, and you know, there's a lot of accessibility features you can change in there. And as I said, the manual, that Ablenet manual, goes through the single switch step scanning and the 2-switch step scanning. So if that's what you're interested in, if you want this standard accessibility to the iPad, I recommend just reading through the manual and looking at some of those videos. But I know, and I'm hoping, and I know for myself, are you looking for something more? I personally have a lot of students who can't do automatic scanning or 2-switch step scanning, and it really limits their accessibility to the iPad. I mean, I have a lot of students where their interest level is at the cause and effect. Like, we're trying to give them more out of the iPad. So how do we do that? You know, one thing I do want my students to do is be able to turn pages of ebooks, whether it be on Epic or Help Kids Learn, or, you know, any app. We want them to be able to interact with books. So think about for a second, what is it that you want your students to access? You don't have to answer, because I don't need 300 responses right now. But think about, what do we want our students to be able to do? Some of you may want the 2-switch step scanning, which again, we can give more information about, but there's a lot of students out there who are struggling to access the curriculum or access content. And with all of our remote learning, we have more kids on iPads than ever before, but unfortunately, so many of our students aren't able to access it well. So what can we do? My answer is the custom gestures and the recipes. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. We're going to create various gestures or single movements that can be programmed and combined to access different apps on the iPad. So what is a recipe? So I'm going to talk about these recipes a lot. So here's our little definition slide. A recipe is a recorded gesture or a series of gestures that can be repeated and activated from a switch. So I'm going to show you how, when we do a switch, when we do a click, we want the iPad, every time we do this click, we want the iPad to say, oh, that's a left swipe or a right swipe, or tap the middle of the screen, or a 3-finger pull down, or the shape of a star. We can program the iPad to do that specific movement or one of those specific movements every time a student hits the switch. So recipes, because it is a single click for a single movement, recipes are great for repetitive tasks. Like I said, turning the pages of a book, or a specific, you know, click this to make the dice roll for a game. And also recipes can be set to automatically turn off after a amount of time or not. I typically don't do that, because this is the only way my students access the iPad, but it's just something I want to let you know. Okay, so let's jump right in. This is the fun stuff. I think this is what you were waiting for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a quick example, and I'm going to show you a video. You have it in the notes section at the very beginning of the chat. There's a copy of the presentation. It's on Google Slides, so you can access it, and all the videos are available on there. So again, this is a very quick video because I just want to kind of show you what it can do. And then I also want to let you know there's a set of written directions after the video, so we'll go through it again. So don't get overwhelmed, just sit back and relax and watch the video and see what it can do.
This is a tutorial in switch accessibility via the Hitch 2 and a 3-port lightning adapter. In order to create switches and accessibility on the iPad, we must first start with the settings. Go ahead to accessibility on the left-hand side and go into switch control. Switch control must be in the off position when you're adding switches and programming. Go ahead and click on switches and you will add a new switch. I'm currently using the Hitch 2 in the orange row, which will be the up arrow, the left arrow, and the right arrow. This will make more sense later based upon what we are programming. To add the switches, you hit external and you activate your external switch. First, I'm going to do orange up arrow. Go ahead and label it based upon the switch interface. So I'm going to name it orange up. You must select something under system, select tap, and continue the process, repeat the process for the other two switches. Add a new switch, external, activate. I'm going to activate orange left right there. And save. Press tap again and add a new switch, and I'm going to do orange right arrow. So external, activate your switch and name it orange right. Click tap again. Once you have all your switches added, you can then back out of the switches and we are going to create a recipe. When you enter into recipes, you will see there are some standard recipes already created. However, they don't involve all of the actions that we need, so we're going to create a new recipe. I'm going to name this recipe iPad Basics. As you can see, a single tap did not allow a keyboard to pop up. You can either double tap, remove the actual attachment, or press the keyboard down here. So I'm going to name this iPad Basic Switches. And then I'm going to assign an action to each of those switches. So for this example, we're doing tapping middle of the screen, turning pages of a book back and forward. So in my mind, it makes the most sense. On the orange left arrow, since it's pointing to the left, that makes sense to move the pages of the book back. So I'm going to take the orange left arrow, and to move the pages of a book back, you swipe left to right. So I'm going to put in the left to right swipe. I'm going to assign another switch to turn pages forward. You go to the right. So in order to turn them forward, you need to swipe from the right to left. So the orange right arrow is going to be a right to left swipe that will move our book forward. And then the up arrow is kind of like a pointing, and that I'm going to use the up arrow as tap middle of the screen. You can assign any switches, any names to any function. This just made the most sense for those actions, and we were trying to make this as easy as possible for each student's assistants, parapros, teachers, parents, and just kind of make it a little more foolproof. So that is why we decided to go orange up, left and right as our recipe. We want ours to be the timeout to be turned off. We do not want this recipe to time out or to turn off after a period of time, so the timeout is turned off. The next thing we need to check is actually launch recipe. So back out of the recipe, click launch recipe, and we want the iPad Basic switches to launch every time we turn on switch control. We don't want the standard two-step switch scanning to launch. We want this special recipe with our special assignments to be launched in order to use the switches. This is a tutorial in switch accessibility via the Hitch 2 and a
Sorry guys, didn't mean to start playing that again. So really quickly, questions related to that I just want to address really quick. So like, why did we choose the swipe and the tap? This was for a lot of my students who are kind of at that cause effect, beginning to explore two switches level. I have a lot of students at that level that I'm working with. And that swipe left and right and that tap middle of the screen were three simple commands that we could program onto every iPad that gave us a lot of flexibility. That swipe left and right, as I said, we could do any books with that. My district uses Epic a lot. So that allowed our students to scroll back and forth. I personally have 2-year-old twins, my own babies. And as I'm reading a book to them, I'll read and read and read. And all of a sudden my daughter will be like, no, and she'll want to go back 3 pages. So I reread the page about the doctor over and over and over again, because that's the page she wanted to read. Or my son was looking back for a picture with the mama bear was doing something different. Like our students, our clients, our kids want to be able to flip back and forth through pages to read a book. So I find that very empowering. Also, the tap middle of the screen works really well for all those cause effect apps out there and programs. For example, Help Kids Learn has a lot of one switch activities, and my district is also using the L3 Skills, which is from Unique Learning System. All of those activities, those one switch activities, can be accessed through that single tap screen. So with just those 3 functions, the swipe left, right, and tap middle of the screen, our students were able to do multiple functions and able to access a lot of apps on the iPad. And what's really nice is they were able to do it during asynchronous education time when they're at home or during their hybrid learning or as homework. They can go home and read a book for 20 minutes, you know, just like many of our other gen ed students. So this gave them a lot of ability to interact with the iPad in a curricular but also independent way. I did program 3 switches. And I said, 3 switches, really? Yes, none of my students were actually using 3 switches at the time, but that one program put all of that information into the iPad. So when our students were at home, parents could just easily unplug and move a switch to a different port and have access to all that information. So putting all 3 of those programs at one time made it a lot easier for it to be the iPad to be used at home. And it was nice and consistent because it just stayed on the orange row, for example, on the Hitch 2. And the timeout, for my students, this recipe was the only way they were interacting with the iPad. You may have a client or a student who's doing some scanning using 2 switch scans to get to a specific app, or scanning within the app to access a certain book, and then maybe they would use the recipe. That can all be accessed through those built-in accessibility features. But again, I didn't want my recipe to time out because this was the only way my students were accessing the iPad. Okay, so here are the directions I went through. These are the written directions of what the video just showed. And you have a copy of the handouts in the very beginning of the chat. There's a copy of my Google handouts that you can go back and access, and you can watch the video again at your leisure. But so what we did, we went to accessibility, switch control. You clicked on the switches, you added the new switch, and you can see here it says make sure you click external switch. And if you're using the Hitch 2 or the Don Johnson switch interface, just make sure you're on the correct level that you actually want it to be on. And a little troubleshooting, if for some reason the switch isn't working, just unplug the adapter from the iPad and plug it in again, and it will kind of re-register. Sometimes they get a little funky every once in a while if the iPad falls asleep, or if you're changing things around. When I was programming, it happened to me just once or twice. So after you click external, it tells you to activate your switch. And then, as I said in the video, make sure you name the switch, not based upon the actual switch in your hand, not based upon the actual switch in your hand, but based upon the function or the program of the switch. So make sure you name it based upon the actual interface. It'll make a lot more sense later when you're programming. Make sure you click tap. I know there's a lot of other options built into the iPad accessibility. And again, that's kind of advanced programming if you have a student or client who's using that multiple level switch scanning. But again, all of those features are available as a part of the iPad. So there are manuals that address that. And I'm more talking about the part of the accessibility that there's no manual to support you. So again, as you're adding switches, I say rinse and repeat, but go ahead and add as many switches as you need for as many functions as you need. And make sure when you back out of the switches and then you go ahead and you enter into recipes. So there's kind of two steps. You're adding all the switches you need, and then you go into recipes and you assign a function to each one of those switches that you just added. So here are the written directions. Again, this was just in the video, but here are the written directions that go along with those recipes. So you go ahead and you create a new recipe, and I say plan, 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 because it's that important. Like, know what you want each switch to do, what functions you want, and for what purpose. But when you click on the recipe, you go ahead you create the new recipe, just as we discussed. And as you saw, there are some defaults, like there is a default recipe there for turn pages of the book, which has the swipe left and the swipe right. But then you can only launch one recipe at a time. So if you only use the turn pages of the book that's built into the iPad, that's the only thing you can do, and you can't add anything else. So I actually find it easier to add all my functionality in at once and just have one recipe to launch, so that parents or support staff don't have to go back and change recipes and do anything funky. I make one robust recipe that has all the functions I want. So you just triple click to turn the recipe on and triple click to turn it off. And that's all that the support person needs to know. As I was talking about the recipe, when you name it, make sure you describe the function of it so that you are understanding the recipe. And this is kind of what I just said. An iPad will only launch one recipe at a time. So make it a good one. Like I said, make sure it has all the functionality you want in it, so that you can just change switches or change levels on your interface to get different functionalities. You don't want to actually have to go into the settings of the iPad and change recipes back and forth. So the video showed an example of a swipe left, swipe right, and tap middle of the screen. The next thing I'm going to show you are some custom gestures, because that is something we use a lot to make our iPads accessible. I mentioned make sure that the timeout is off. At least for my students, that was most functional. You go ahead, you back out of the recipe, and don't forget that you have to click on the launch recipe and then actually select your recipe. So just making the recipe isn't enough. You have to tell the iPad that you want to launch that recipe, or you want to start that recipe when you start switch control. If you don't click on the launch recipe, as soon as you start switch control, it's going to start like scanning, doing the automatic scanning. So if you want it to do our special things we just programmed, like the swipe left, swipe right, or tap middle of the screen, you have to make sure that you launch that recipe. Okay, believe it or not, that's all you have to do. Not too much, right? It was done in a 5-minute video. So you can just follow along the video. If you got 5 minutes per iPad, you're set, you're ready to go. You'll get real good at it. So the programming is complete, and I'm saying, let's get this party started. Let's see what we can really do. Okay, let's test.
Accessibility down at the bottom. I'm going to do accessibility.
Oh, sorry. What I really wanted to show you, I talked about just now using a triple click to start the switch control and turn it off. This, if you go to accessibility and go to the bottom, that's what this video is showing. That is how we actually get that triple click to start switch control and triple click to turn it off. So that's what this video is showing right now. Sorry for not doing a quick little.
Accessibility down at the bottom. I'm going to do accessibility shortcuts, and I want to make sure switch control is checked. And I also typically have guided access on for my students. That way, when we are out in an app or anywhere in the iPad, you can triple click and you will see that your iPad configuration, that your switch control is turned on and off. So a triple click will turn it on and launch the recipe you wanted, and a triple click will turn it off. That way, when you go into any app, you will see that when you do the arrow up, you'll see a tap middle of the screen. When you do the arrow to the left, you'll see a swipe, and arrow to the right, you'll also see a swipe. So those are the finger movements that these 3 switches are now programmed for. So those could be used in a variety of apps depending what your need is for that given app.
That's what's really neat about the programming we're doing. You program the switches to emulate a finger. So any app that can function with a swipe or a tap will be accessible. You don't have to scan and hope that things will highlight or hope it's accessible. So these are pre-programmed movements. You're basically programming the iPad that each one of these switch hits is like a finger touching it. And you saw the little black line or the black circle go across and the black circle. That is what the iPad is registering every time you hit that switch. So that's what we just talked about now was the triple click. It's under accessibility shortcuts. It's the fastest way to start and stop switch control. And it's definitely the way that I access switch control all the time. Like once you're in that background, you did all your programming, you got your recipe, you're ready to launch your recipe. Everyone doesn't have to know about that. That could be you just doing the programming in the background. All that the teacher or the student or the parent needs to know is they just do a triple click and their switches work, do another triple click and the switches stop. It's really easy now. And that's why I say, let's get this party started, because that's all they have to know is just a quick little triple click to get it started. So it's really nice. A lot of work on the back end, a lot of programming, a lot of figuring out for you, but then the functionality of actually like putting the iPad in front of someone, you do a triple click and bam, they're able to access everything they need, which is pretty nice. Okay, so as if that wasn't enough, I want to show you some advanced programming options. You know, like how many switches can we really add? I just showed you 3, but do you think you can do 4, 5, 7, 8? The answer is yes, and it's awesome. So what I want to talk about is like, what can we really make an iPad do? Let me show you if you have too much time on your hands and you want to make something really accessible and it's super fun. I had a lot of fun playing with this. So let me show you some of the options. Like, oh, the possibilities. It's very fun. The Hook Plus. So the possibility is, even though I mentioned port 1 and 2 automatically configure to do that switch, single switch or 2 switch step scanning, you can actually go in and delete that auto configuration. And then you can then have 4 switch ports that you can do custom programming on. So the Hook Plus has up to 4 actions or gestures that can be programmed onto it. The Blue 2, the default comes with 6 different options, but like I said, if you plug in a keyboard, you can program the Bluetooth. So with programming, you have up to 10 options. The Don Johnson Switch Interface Pro has 18 programmable switches or 18 actions or gestures you could program, which is just amazing. I haven't tried all 18 in one iPad. I think I only got up to 10 once, but that's something you could definitely try and play around with if you have. The Hitch 2, the default comes with 6, but again, I mentioned if you plug in a keyboard and program the Hitch 2, you can add another 5 actions on that bottom row. This bottom blue row can be programmed to have 5 additional actions, so you can have up to 7. So here's the possibilities for those 4. Again, there are additional switch interfaces that I haven't mentioned here. I know I think Ablenet has a Bluetooth switch. I think RJ Cooper might have another switch interface. There are definitely options out there. There's not enough time in the world for me to mention every single one, which is why I'm just kind of focusing on the 4 that I personally own and I have used. But hopefully this at least gives you some ideas and some ability of where to play and where to start figuring out some of your own. This I just put, if you have the Blue 2, I'm showing you that the first 3 modes are your available. The default and mode 5 and 6 can be programmed. Again, you only need this information if you have the Blue 2. Here's a slide on how to program it. If you want to program those extra ones on the Bluetooth, that's just for your information if you have it. The Hook Plus, I said you can have those 4 switches. On Don Johnson, everything on the Don Johnson interface can be programmed except the red and yellow click. The iPad does not register a click as an option. And on the Hitch 2, you can use the space enter on the green row, the up, down, left, and right on the orange row, and then you can program that blue row on number 1 through 5. So those are your options. Oh, the possibilities. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about now are our custom gestures. This is what really opens up all the doors to switch accessibility and using just about anything on an iPad. The biggest thing is to plan. I know I'm saying that a lot, but that's because it's that important. So you really have to think about what you want to accomplish when you have an app out. So this is kind of like, let's think ahead, let's plan, let's choose the right app and the right activity for our students. The first thing you need to do is test the app on your own. Get out the iPad, play with it. We're wanting some games, some activities. If you can have like 2 to 6 different movements, certain movements, or tap here to play this and go to next page. If there's certain gestures or certain movements that you can do to interact with the app, if you're in that range of 2 to 6 different movements, you can get a lot done with switch accessibility. I also want to mention, don't forget to utilize eye gaze or a communication device for choices along with the switch interactions on the iPad, especially for those apps that have more than 6 movements. Like, for example, one of the apps I like to accommodate for students is a spin art, where we use their communication device or eye gaze to choose the color, but then I adapted the iPad with switches so the student can start and stop the spinner. They can press another switch that will draw a shape and put paint all over the spinner, and then they can press another switch that presents it so people can see. So again, we use the eye gaze and the communication device to pick what color, but once the student picks the color with me, then they have the ability to interact with the iPad and do the rest of the activity. One thing I do want to mention, FYI, movements can be combined into one custom gesture. You're going to see, I'm going to show a video next of me programming a custom gesture, and you'll see that there's, 8 seconds or 10 seconds for you to actually, 5 seconds, sorry, I should have counted, a couple of seconds for you to actually record a gesture. You can put as many gestures or as many movements into that one recording as possible. So use what you can. And just think, the student doesn't have to have every single step of every app or every game switch accessible. Feel free to have them partner up. I am going to mention, though, for your own sanity, you need to write down a script or directions of what you're programming for the complex games, and you'll see that in the video of why. I'm also going to show you how to create overlays of the movements for the games, which will make sense in just a second. And then really, before you get started, part of that plan is in your head, you need to determine how many movements you need, because the first step to doing custom gestures is just adding in the switches. So just as before, these are the same exact directions we went through before. You go in and you add in as many switches as you need movements for. So again, the Hitch 2 has 6 on it. The Don Johnson has up to 18. Again, I haven't tried all 18, but go ahead and add in all the switches you need, and then watch this video.
Custom gestures in your recipes is where switch accessibility gets really fun. The first step is to plan. Basically, that's what I have to emphasize. Go ahead and pick any app. Any app, whether it be Fruit Ninja for swiping that you would need to access, maybe a spin art app where you have to pick a color, paint, press the spinning to go, even something like this, Paint Party. This is a makeup-based app that I just thought would be fun for one of our students if it's something of their interest. Determine first what the app requires to be successful. In this app, you must take soap, wash the face, you need to take a brush and brush the hair. Practice the app and go through the movements to determine what's necessary. Once you decide what your finger is actually doing, for example, picking the green face mask and putting it on, determine where the path that your finger took. You then need to take either some overhead projector or some laminate. I'm personally using the leftover laminate. And you need to practice and look and decide where your finger starts. You can use it with the laminate on, which is very nice. And you need to actually make the marks to say, make sure I go here, start here, and draw the path of what it takes for the app to be successful. This is very important when we're creating a custom gesture. So once you have your overlays made, this overlay was made for the first 3 and 4 directions to this app, and this is now directions 4 through 6. Always make sure you place a little circle around the home button so you know which way is up and down, because later you might get yourself in a wrong orientation. Once you have your plans created, go ahead to settings. Make sure you have all your switches entered. Right now I have the 6 switches entered for the Hitch 2, and I am going to go and create a recipe. This is going to be a new recipe. I'm going to name it Makeup, just so it makes sense to me. And then we are going to assign switches. The first set I'm going to do is just the green row because it's on top of my Hitch 2. So the space green enter. So the green space, I'm going to make that number 1. Now, I don't need it to tap the middle of the screen or left and right swipe. I actually need a custom gesture. So click on custom gesture, go ahead and put your overlay down and create the number 1 custom gesture. And you will see that as you do a custom gesture, your finger, whatever you trace for your finger, will be traced, and that will become the custom gesture. That will be exactly the same movement that the iPad executes when you hit that switch. So that's number 1, and that's that custom gesture. Let's do the next one. So I'm going to do the green enter. That's number 2. So I need to go over here to number 2, create another custom gesture. And number 2 was grabbing something, I believe it was like the brush, and we go back and forth and we brush our hair. So that is now, you see exactly what my finger did is what's being traced by the iPad. Go ahead and save that. And I'm going to do another one. Number 3, I can't remember what that was. Oh, it's putting cucumbers on the eye. So I'm going to do the orange up arrow because that's the next one. I'm going to create another custom gesture. And I'm going to go grab 1 cucumber and grab another cucumber. And those will be the 2 cucumbers on her eye. And I'm going to save that.
All right, I just stopped the video there, but you could see you can go through and create custom gestures for every single switch that you've added.
Custom gesture.
All right, so again, here are the directions of what I just did. So once you've done your prep work, which I know is a bit of prep work, but once you do it, it's worth it. It's super fun. This gives you the directions of how to click on the recipe, create the new recipe, you name it, you pick a switch, and you assign the function for each, create the custom gesture. So again, these are the exact directions that I just went through in the video, and they're similar as last time because we want to make sure the timeout's off. Make sure you back out of the recipe when you're done, click launch recipe, and click on your recipe that you just made. Okay, so here's the fun part. What does it look like for our students? Check your work.
Let's go ahead and test our custom recipe and custom gestures. So when we click the green space, that'll be our first one. That will be our soap. Let's test it. It swipes down and around. Very nice. Let's test our next one. That will be the brush. That was our green enter. Fabulous. We checked her off. Let's test number 3, which was our orange up. I'm currently changing the level on the Hitch 2 so that I can do orange up, which is the cucumbers. As you can see, I was a little high on my grab of the cucumbers. So that is a recipe, a custom gesture I will need to re-record. I may even just want to check my overlay. See, I must have grabbed just a little further off. I need to grab a little further down so you could make a little note on your overlay to go right underneath the 3. And that's something you can re-record. But as you go through, you'll see that all these custom gestures are recorded and you're able to complete just about any app.
Okay, so that was the first one I recorded. And as you can see, there were actually 2 mistakes in it, but I decided to leave it in so that you guys could learn from my mistakes. It just so happened, you saw the soap didn't quite go down as I wanted it to. When I was recording the custom gesture, my finger got stuck on the laminate and my finger popped off and went down again. So that's why the soap didn't work perfectly. And I went back and watched the video of me recording the one for the cucumbers. My overlay was a little too high. That little circle wasn't right on the home button. So my overlay was a little off. So that's why that didn't work. But again, so once you create your custom gestures, make your recipes, go back and check your work. But as you could see, does anyone know like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 8-year-old girl that would love to sit with one of her friends and do the makeup? I mean, that just opened up the possibility to some really fun apps. I mean, that iPad is now accessible in ways that they never thought about before. So when you're programming the iPad, let me get this quick summary in. Things to remember: make sure switch controls turned off when you're actually programming the switches. Make sure you name the switches based on the switch interface, not the actual switch color in your hand. Again, if the switch isn't registering on your iPad, unplug the adapter, plug it in again, it'll probably work. Remember, you can only launch one recipe at a time, so add in all the functionality to the one recipe that you want. Don't forget to turn on the accessibility shortcut for switch control, so you can do the triple click to turn on and triple click to turn off. It makes it so much faster. And then once the iPad falls asleep, depending what interface you're using, you might have to just triple click off and on again to make the switch control work correctly if it starts auto scanning on you by accident. I did mention the long press before. Technically, if your student, client, child is able to use, cognitively knows the difference between a quick click and a long click, you can actually double the amount of functionality that you have based upon that long press. Oh, the possibilities. I was so excited when I was planning this. I could have shown you guys like 500 videos because I have a spin art one that's really fun. You now have access to books that's really fun. There's a bunch of Toca Boca apps that, you know, having a monster make some food and eat things. There's so many things you can do that can support social interaction and play now that you have those custom gestures and recipes. I would be remiss if I didn't show you guys a few apps that already were switch accessible. This wouldn't be a switch accessible presentation without this list. So go ahead, there's just compilations of various switches that are made to be accessible, which wouldn't take a whole lot of programming. These are more just the plug in, click and play sort of things. They're all available on those websites I have. Again, Help Kids Learns, L3 Skills, Inclusive TLC, Judy Lynn Software, and MarbleSoft. I used to use them a lot for switch accessibility on the computer. They had programs, but now they also have apps, which is really nice. And then there are plenty of communication devices that are switch accessible. Go Talk Now is a lower level app that's accessible, but Touch Chat, Lamp, Words for Life, they're all switch accessible too. So again, those have those built-in switch accessibility features. So you can go to their manuals and their directions and help make those switch accessible. Finally, I had to tell you about this because it's my favorite mount. Modular hose. Lockline is the product they have, and the Mogo mounting. On the right, you can see this is a rigid mount. It's their Mogo mount, but they have their flexible modular hose. I often use this mounting for the switches for my students, but I also use it to hold the iPads. For the price and the quality and the service, it's my favorite. So I just wanted to mention that here. And woohoo, give it a whirl, jump right in, make it fun. I know I just threw a lot at you. There's a lot of information in this presentation. So again, you have the link to the presentation. You can go back and watch the videos. There's the written directions. And I provided a lot of links that there wasn't time to go through it all, but there's links for the Hook Plus and the Bluetooth that explain those more in detail. And we'll also show you how to get those hooked up. So I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves. I hope you do give it a whirl. I hope you do have the opportunity to make it fun, because there's a lot of opportunities to use the iPad in ways that our students have never, ever done it before. I'll stick around and answer some questions because there are plenty. I hope you enjoyed it though. Thanks. Okay, I guess I'll jump into questions. Okay. Can any of the switch options be used along with voice options such as speech to text? I haven't tried that just because all of my students utilizing switches at the moment are more nonverbal or struggling communicators. Not to say it can't be done, I just haven't tried it. I have not tried a Bluetooth keypad, but it's something worth trying. And that's actually what I want to say is a lot of this I just discovered by sitting, playing, and trying. So that's probably my answer to everything is it's worth trying. Okay, so any guidance on using interfaces and connections with a browser? It is a little more difficult to use browsers with switch accessibility, but even on a computer, let's say if you're using Chrome or if you're using Safari, my best suggestion is to use the 2-switch scanning. The mover, like the next button, it'll click you and scan through different highlightable fields, and then you use the second switch to select that field. Most of what I talked about today, like the custom gestures and recipes, wouldn't really work on a browser. You would want to utilize that more for the 2-switch step scanning. One thing I forgot to mention is YouTube. YouTube is a fun one for custom gestures. You can have one switch do the play and pause, which is just a tap, and you can have another switch do the next button to go to the next song. So that gives some of our students control of like, yeah, I like this song. No, I don't. Go to the next one. That's even just a fun leisure activity that you can make switch accessible. Joseph asked how much training was required for students to use the Hitch 2. I personally don't have many students. I only have, I'm going to say 1.5 students who are functional with the 2-switch step scanning. So that took a little bit more training. I found most of the training that I do is for the caregiver, the parapro, the teacher. But like I mentioned earlier, once you do all of the programming in the background and provide good directions to the support staff, all they have to do is triple click to start it and triple click to turn it off. So really functionality wise, once they get started, that's all that the parent or teacher has to do. There was someone asked the alternative for the Don Johnson. I hope you see, I love the Don Johnson Switch Interface Pro, but also the Hitch 2 worked really well for me. I haven't tried the Hook Plus on an iPhone, but my thought is it would absolutely work because it uses the same exact iOS system as the iPad. Epic, there was a question about Epic. Epic is just an app, but it's a book reading app that our school district has access to. What's nice about that swipe left and swipe right is that it's completely universal. It could be used with any book reading app. I even used it with the I Like Books. There's a couple free I Like Books apps out there, and you're able to swipe left and right. So any book, any ebook that you have that all you need is a swipe left and right to change the page, turn the pages, that would work for that book. Emily asked if there are any cause effect or switch teaching apps for adults or older kids. I would say go through that list. Older kids is hard. I would say explore all of these though. I think the L3 skills actually is designed for some older individuals. I know the Judy Lynn, I think, is a little younger. I would say click on this enabling devices one. There's a list of like 25 different apps there. You might find one that meets your needs. Okay, someone asked, can you give an example of how you name the recipes? For example, would you call it Epic if you're just using it for Epic? I actually try to put as many functionalities into each recipe as possible. For example, I had the left, right pages and the tap just as like my iPad basics. So I programmed those three, that iPad basic switches on every single iPad that I sent home. And then it's on my personal iPad or on my therapy iPad that I spend the extra time and effort doing like that. That makeup game was programmed on my iPad. So that was something I could bring in during a therapy activity to interact with and make choices and take turns with a peer. The one thing about doing all these programs is you do have to program it on the actual iPad it's going to be used on. So it's not something that you can just program and send in the cloud or anything like that. You do need to have hands on the actual iPad that they are going to be using. So I guess name the recipes in a way that makes sense and is as functional for you guys. Okay, so there's a question about individuals with significant visual impairments, auditory scanning and the step scanning. I haven't done much scanning. Let me think. I did use the Bluetooth switch with 2 CVI clients, and they were using one of the communication apps for scanning. I guess I would actually say if you're trying to teach 2 switch step scanning with someone that needs auditory scanning or the auditory prompt, I would probably actually go to the Go Talk Now app. That lets you have anywhere from 2 up to like 36 different cells, and you can do an auditory prompt and the actual selection. I think that would be, there's lots of apps out there, so I'm not necessarily saying one is better than the other, but I have been able to do some auditory scanning with a student using the Go Talk Now app. We had them like on a field of 6. And they were just using that to make simple choices. So that was, I would say do it in that controlled environment first where there isn't a lot of distractions before you try to move to some of the other apps. All right, I am going to have to look at the Google Slides. Someone was saying that the video isn't working. So I will double check that because I'll definitely find the way to make sure that the videos are accessible to you guys, because I know just the directions are hard, having the video is nice. Oh, there was a question about the home button. The new iPads don't have a home button, so how do you triple click to turn accessibility features on and off? That is a phenomenal question. I don't own one of the new fancy iPads yet. I still just have the home button. I'm assuming though, I would have to double check, but I'm sure the accessibility features and the accessibility shortcuts still exist on the new iPads that don't have a home button. They probably just replaced it with something else. It's probably like a swipe up. So that is something I would have to experiment, but I am sure it's there because I'm sure they did not get rid of it. I'm sure they didn't get rid of the accessibility shortcuts. So you just have to figure out how to access accessibility shortcuts on the new iPads. Okay, does guided access turn on simultaneously when switch control, when you triple click on the home button? No. Typically, in the past, I know I typically just use that triple click for guided access, but under the accessibility at the very bottom, I showed go to the accessibility shortcut. As soon as you start adding multiple functions onto that accessibility shortcut, what happens as soon as you do your triple click, there'll be a little pop-up window that will ask, do you want to do guided access now, or do you want to do switch control? And then you just click on switch control. So as soon as you have multiple functionalities in that triple click, it'll ask you what functionality you want to use. So it does not throw you into guided access at the same time. It gives you the options. Krista mentioned that it's really hard to read what I was doing on the iPad when I was videotaping, and I know that. I'm really sorry. Due to coronavirus, I couldn't have somebody hovering over me very well to make good, clear videos for you. Hopefully, though, having the written directions along with the video being able to see and hear, like if you have an iPad with you, I believe I provided enough information that you should be able to follow along. So with the current accessibility options, is it possible to program a switch in a way to open a specific app on the iPad upon activation? Typically, the iPad is designed to use that switch scanning, like the built-in switch scanning to go and open apps. I have not tried to use the custom gestures just on their own. I've only ever tried to use them in a recipe. Let me see if they show up really quick. You guys are asking great questions. Yes, so just so you know, on the iPad, when you're just on your home screen, I'm going to show you one of my custom gestures right now. So I'm going to click right now. It's actually set up for that. Remember that cucumber, move the cucumbers down to the I. So it's 2 V's. So you'll see when I press the switch, you see that the iPad is going through that movement. So technically, if you have the iPad and you start a custom gesture, a custom recipe, you could create one custom gesture that would open up, say like this app, and another custom gesture that would open up this app, you know, and then once the app is opened, you could then switch it to go to another level to interact with the app. So there certainly are some possibilities if you're really exploring and want to play with it. Great question there, Emily. What is the name of the Spin Art app? I have no idea, but it's a free one. So I just picked the free one. It's actually called Spin Art Free. So give it a go, give it a try. Melissa, I'm glad you like the overlays. Can you do an example with the blue 2? So the blue 2 would be exactly the same as what I showed with the hitch 2. The blue 2, just instead of pressing this button to go through the different levels of the hitch 2, you would press the mode button. You can see on the blue 2, there's 6 different modes. Once it's on, you would just press modes to go to the extra levels. And just know, when you put your switches in for the blue 2, make sure you name them based upon your mode. So if you name this one white, I would do white 1, white 2, white 3, white 4, 5, or 6. And that is how you would name your switches so that you could give different functionalities to each one of those switches. I know, again, there's only 2 on here, but as soon as you move through the modes, you can have up to 10 different functions on the blue 2. The plastic overlay that I used, it was called the leftover. Someone at least asked what the plastic overlay is called. It is when you're in your school and you're doing lamination, you know how some laminate has to come out before you actually feed yours in, and at the end of the lamination, you have to have it keep going so you can cut. The plastic overlays I use, this little plastic, is actually just the junk lamination, the trash that people normally throw away before and after their lamination. So you can see it's just really thin lamination. So I just went and asked my speech therapist. I was like, hey, next time you're cutting out a whole bunch of lamination, save me your scraps. She looked at me like I was nuts and laughed, but she did anyways, which I really appreciated. Okay, so proximity switches. That was a very good question. Technically, this switch, it does not matter what the actual switch is. All of the programming we're doing is based upon the interface. So when I showed you guys that makeup that I did, I actually only had the student using 2 different switches, and I just moved the modes, or I moved the switches so that they could access it. So technically you can use any type of switch you want. You can use electrical switches, you can use proximity switches, you can, the sky's the limit on choosing what switch you actually want. So use what's available to you, use what your student can access, which is kind of nice. So any switch can be used. It's more a matter of making sure the programming is done right with the recipe. And yes, Jan asked a question. Once you create a recipe, it does stay on the iPad for future use. For example, I said before, a couple months ago when we went remote learning, I sat down with one of my other teachers and we sat and we programmed like 20 different iPads to have swipe left, swipe right, tap the middle of the screen. And we went in, we did the launch recipe, we did the accessibility shortcut where the triple click was available. So every single one of those, that recipe, that one single recipe was programmed and sent home on every single iPad to our students. So that way, later, let's say 1 month down the road, the teacher says, okay, now we're going to actually explore a new app. We're going to try Epic, go to the Epic app on your computer. And then he could tell, or on your iPad, sorry. And he could tell, the staff, the caregivers, the parents, plug it into arrow left and arrow right and triple click. And, we provided the directions then. So yes, recipes can be stored on iPads for future use.
Megan, we have time for one more question and then we'll have to call it quits.
Oh my goodness, so much, guys. I guess you'll have to email me or experiment yourself. I don't even know what to answer. I got nothing. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I guess let me know if there's anything else. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Megan. We appreciate all your great information. And that will conclude our webinar for today. It will be recorded and available on YouTube within the next 24 hours. Thank you.